Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Pero and Hanako.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really focusing on a super critical time for Japan, the years leading right up to World War II.
That's right. We'll be looking at how Japan's decisions back then were tangled up with these huge shifts happening across the globe.
Exactly. And if you're, getting started with Japanese history, understanding this background is just essential. It sets the stage for so much that follows. Okay, so let's dive into what the world looked like then.
Well, the late 1930s were incredibly turbulent, especially in Europe. You had Germany becoming really aggressive under the Nazis.
Right, starting around 1938 with Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia.
Precisely. The annexation of Austria, the Sudetenland.
Right.
It wasn't just about land. It was a direct challenge to the whole European power structure.
Yeah.
A sign things were seriously changing.
And then something really unexpected happened, didn't it? That German-Soviet non-aggression pact in August 39.
Oh, absolutely. A bombshell, especially for Japan.
Because Japan was aligned with Germany and Italy in the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was, well, fundamentally anti-Soviet, anti-communist.
Exactly. And they'd even had direct military clashes with the Soviets.
Yeah.
Chungkuping in 38, Nomonhan in 39. Quite serious incidents.
So for their main European ally, Germany, to suddenly sign a pact with their main ideological adversary, that must have caused chaos in Tokyo.
Complete shock. The Hiroshima government just couldn't square it. They resigned almost immediately. It just pulled the rug out from under their whole foreign policy framework.
You have to wonder what the different factions were thinking. Maybe some in the military saw it differently, like a temporary thing?
Possibly. Some might have seen it as, tactical maneuvering by Germany. But fundamentally, it undermined Japan's whole strategy of aligning against communism globally.
Yeah.
It forced a massive rethink, maybe a panicked one.
And the consequences were immediate. September 1st, 1939.
Germany invades Poland. And this invasion was actually facilitated by secret parts of that non-aggression pact.
Right. They'd basically agreed beforehand how to carve up Eastern Europe between Germany and the Soviet Union.
That's it. And because Britain and France had alliances with Poland, they had to react.
September 3rd, they declare war on Germany. And just like that, World War II starts in Europe.
While Japan is sort of watching from the sidelines, trying to figure out its next move.
And the Soviets, they weren't just watching either.
No, they moved right into eastern Poland, took control of the Baltic states, exactly as per their secret agreement with Germany.
Meanwhile, Japan's official stance under the Abe cabinet initially was non-intervention.
Yes, and the next cabinet, the Yonai cabinet, continued that policy for a time.
It's interesting to think what might have happened if they'd stuck to that, but, well, events overtook them, didn't they?
They did. That initial neutrality, it reflected a lot of internal debate, confusion maybe, about this totally changed global landscape. But then came Germany's blitzkrieg in Europe.
May, June 1940. The fall of France.
Exactly. Those incredibly fast, decisive German victories. They had a huge psychological impact in Japan. Suddenly, Germany looked unstoppable.
And that perception fueled certain elements in Japan. Right. Especially within the army.
Absolutely. Support surged for tying Japan closer to Germany. There was this feeling of, well, if Germany can do it in Europe, maybe we could do something similar in Asia.
And something similar increasingly looked like expanding southwards.
Yes.
Into Southeast Asia. The colonies held by the French, the Dutch, the British.
Why there specifically? Resources.
Primarily resources. Oil, rubber, tin. Things Japan desperately needed for its industry and military, especially with the war in China dragging on and increasing tensions with the U.S.
Even knowing it would likely mean conflict with the U.S. and Britain.
The perceived need for those resources, combined with the apparent opportunity created by Germany's success, started to outweigh the risks in the minds of many influential figures. The momentum shifted.
Which brings us to changes within Japan, this New Order movement. What was that all about? It was essentially a push to reshape Japan's political system, to create a more centralized, totalitarian state.
Taking inspiration from Nazi Germany, it seems.
To some extent, yes. The idea was to create a strong, single-party system, eliminate political infighting, and mobilize the entire nation under strong leadership. Konofu Mimaro was the central figure pushing for this.
And the army was behind this?
Very much so. They saw the existing party politics as inefficient and weak, unable to make the decisive moves they felt were necessary.
And this directly impacted the government in power, the Yonai cabinet.
Yes. The Yonai cabinet was seen as too cautious, too reluctant to fully embrace the southward expansion or get closer to Germany.
So the army pressured them.
They did. The Army's dissatisfaction basically forced Yonai's resignation in July 1940.
And Konoe formed his second cabinet, a clear signal of a shift in direction.
A very clear signal. And under Kono, this New Order idea really took off.
Existing political parties were dissolved.
Right. They were pushed to voluntarily dissolve and merge into this new structure. The aim was national unity, or at least the appearance of it, to remove any potential opposition.
And this led to the Imperial Rule Assistance Association, the Taisei Yokosankai.
Yes, established in October 1940, with Kono as its president, this was meant to be the vehicle for the new order.
How did it work? Was it like the Nazi Party?
Well, it aimed for that kind of total mobilization. It was structured all the way down to local neighborhood associations, trying to control daily life and rally support for the state. But it never quite became the rigid, single ideological party, like in Germany. It was maybe more of a broad, state-controlled umbrella organization.
Interesting distinction, and around this time there was a big national celebration too, wasn't there?
1940, the 2600th anniversary of the mythical ascension of Emperor Jimmu.
What was the significance of that happening right then?
It was a huge outpouring of nationalism. It emphasized Japan's unique history, the imperial line, national destiny, all feeding into this atmosphere of mobilization.
And it had militaristic aspects.
Oh, definitely. There were parades, ceremonies. I think there was even a famous image of Tokyo subway workers marching in military formation. It all reinforced that sense of national unity and purpose, geared towards the state's goals.
And this militarization reached into schools, too.
Yes. In 1941, they renamed elementary schools national schools, Kokumin Gaiko. Again, about instilling loyalty, national duty, right from young age.
So with all this happening internally and the war raging in Europe, Japan makes a major external move, the Tripartite Pact.
September 1940. Japan formally allies with Germany and Italy. Foreign Minister Matsuoka Yosuke was the driving force behind this.
What was Matsuoka's rationale? What did Japan hope to gain?
Matsuoka strongly believed that aligning with the Axis powers was the way forward. He thought it would secure Japan's position, guarantee its sphere of influence in East Asia.
And maybe deter the U.S.?
That was a key aim. The thinking was that if the U.S. saw Japan align with Germany and Italy, it might hesitate to get involved in either Europe or Asia.
What were the actual terms of the pact?
Well, essentially mutual recognition of leadership. Germany and Italy recognize Japan's new order in Greater East Asia, and Japan recognized theirs in Europe.
And mutual defense.
Yes, crucially. If one of the signatories was attacked by a power not currently involved in the European war or the war in China, everyone knew this meant the U.S., the others would provide political, economic, and military aid.
But it excluded the Soviet Union.
Yes, the Soviet Union was explicitly excluded from that mutual defense clause.
So it was really aimed squarely at the United States.
Primarily, yes. Though, ironically, instead of deterring the U.S., it probably hardened American opposition, making Japan look like part of a global aggressive bloc, a major strategic miscalculation, perhaps.
And they had big signing ceremonies, I recall, in Berlin, Tokyo.
Absolutely. Lots of fanfare to project this image of Axis unity and strength, a new world order being forged.
Shortly after the pact, Japan moves troops into French Indochina, northern Vietnam, basically.
Right, in the latter half of 1940. This served a couple of key strategic purposes.
Cutting off supplies to China.
That was one major goal. To block the so-called Chiang Kai-shek route, the flow of Allied aid reaching nationalist China through Indochina.
And the other goal?
To establish a base, a foothold for further potential moves southward, closer to those resources in Malaya and the Dutch East Indies.
Okay, so Japan allies with Germany and Italy, moves into Indochina, but then Matsuoka goes and signs a neutrality pact with the Soviet Union in April 1941.
Yes, it seems contradictory, doesn't it? Matsuoka flew to Moscow for that.
What was the strategy there? It seems like playing all sides.
That's exactly what Matsuoka was trying to do, it seems. A very complex, maybe overly clever diplomatic game. He hoped the Tripartite Pact would deter the U.S., and the Neutrality Pact would secure Japan's northern border against the Soviets.
Freeing them up to focus on southward expansion?
That was the idea. Protect the rear flank, deter the main potential adversary, and then pursue the objectives in Southeast Asia.
But it didn't work out that way.
No. Instead of improving relations or creating maneuvering room, these moves, the Axis alliance, occupying Indochina, just further increased suspicion and tension, especially with the United States. It pushed them further down the road to conflict.
So just to recap this incredibly packed period, we start with Germany shaking up Europe, the shock of the German-Soviet pact hitting Japan,
which forces a major strategic rethink. Then Germany's victories make expansion seem possible, even necessary, to influential groups in Japan.
fueling the push south for resources. Internally, the New Order movement consolidates power, pushing out cautious voices and creating structures like the Taisei Yokusankai to mobilize the nation.
Leading to the formal alliance with Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Pact, aimed largely at deterring the U.S.
Followed by the move into northern Indochina, and then the somewhat contradictory neutrality pact with the Soviet Union. All of which, instead of achieving Japan's aims, really just escalated tensions further, particularly with America.
That sums it up well. A series of interconnected events, internal and external, that dramatically shifted Japan's course and set the stage for the Pacific War.
Definitely. So as you continue exploring this era of Japanese history, maybe reflect on this. How much did those internal political shifts, that whole New Order push, actually drive the foreign policy choices? Was the alignment with the Axis and the focus on expansion inevitable once those internal changes took root? Or were there still other paths Japan could have taken? It's worth digging into accounts from the time to get a feel for the debates and pressures involved.